Hi, everybody.
Yes, Dr. Meyer, hi. Please go ahead and get started. I will just say briefly, this is Dr. Ilan Meyer. We are very honored to have him join us today and to present the results of some fabulous research that was done about stigma and people on the registry. So having said that, Dr. Meyer, please begin.
Well, thank you, Janice, and thank you, everybody, for joining. Yeah, I'm going to talk about some results from our study. I presented some of it last year. So this is the updated and final results, although the report itself is still being worked on. So I would be very interested in your feedback and any kind of comments and any kind of suggestions that you might have. The project has been helped by many people, including Janice, who is an advisor on the project, and we have scientific advisors, and the co-investigators are Angela Irving, Tamara Lavi, and Laura Stemple. The study was called SOURCE, and it involved recruiting people who are required to be registered. It was funded by the Commons Foundation, a small foundation from New York, and I'm very thankful to their support. Basically, we had very broad aims, which was to describe the population, as we call it in the research world, describe pathways leading to the registration, and meaning having to do with the trial and differences in the trial, and describe the collateral consequences of the registration and notification. We have a special aim to look specifically at LGBTQ plus people on the registry. Today, I will focus on the third aim, which is the collateral consequences of registration. Just to put this in context, when we talk about stigma, one of the defining characteristics of stigma that it involves not just the rejection of an act, even a crime, but the person as a whole. And Goffman called this the spoiled identity. So the entire identity of the person is colored by the stigma. The labeled person, meaning the person who's being stigmatized, is you as them versus us. They are linked to undesirable, negative characteristics, and people experience negative emotional reactions to the labeled person: fear, repulsion, disgust. Those are interestingly common to all stigmatized groups. So if I was talking about gay people, if I was talking about ethnic minorities, if I was talking about people with any particular handicap or illness, those are very known reactions that people have. And as far as the labeled person, the person who's being stigmatized, they usually experience loss in status and increase in discrimination. And so with this in mind, I'm going to present some results related to what are called in the field collateral consequences of the registration. But I think it's really important to note that collateral seems like unintentional or unforeseen consequences. And I don't think that in the case of the registry, this is true, because those consequences, part of them are not really collateral. They're part of the legal landscape, the terms of requirements that people have in terms of housing, for example. So when we call it collateral consequences, I think it's almost like excusing some of the laws that govern registries. And I want to be clear that that is not the case in my mind. So just very briefly about our methods, we basically put the questionnaire online. We ask people to participate by doing a whole range of outreach, both on Facebook and Twitter and other social media, and by publicizing it, such as in the different advocacy groups, by talking to public defenders, by talking to treatment centers. So we made a lot of effort. We sent hundreds of emails to people who we thought could help. We did not include people who are in prison or jail. The reason for that was that we didn't think that we can control any kind of confidentiality issues, which we promised people by participating in this research. They will be completely confidential and even anonymous. So not even, but anonymous. So people, we did get some requests from people who were in prisons and jails, and we had to tell them that they cannot be included. We also had a financial limitation that we had to use only self-administered internet-based questions, and we couldn't mail questionnaires. So people obviously had to be allowed to have the facility to go online and respond to the questionnaire. They could respond to the questionnaire in any instrument, a computer, tablet, telephone. But as I said, there was a limitation that they had to be able to do that. And I know that is difficult for some people on the registry who are barred from social media and maybe were afraid to do this. So this was our constraints. We, at the end, have data on 965 people. That's on the middle column here. And 206 people who maybe started the questionnaire, didn't finish, didn't have very much done, were excluded. Just to show you what are some of the differences between those two groups. There were some higher proportion of people who didn't complete, who were less educated. That is very typical in studies in general. They were also somewhat more likely to be people of color. And other than that, there was not a lot of differences. We actually, I don't know if you can see when I put my cursor, can you see it? Janice, can you see?
Yes, we can see the cursor.
Okay, great. So there was actually somewhat increase in the people who are LGBTQ among the participants. In terms of where people came from, we had a very good dispersion across the country. So this was something that we were very worried about. We didn't want to have representation for specific states. Obviously, their bigger states are more highly represented, but there definitely is a national survey. In terms of the main demographics, what I would show you in some of the slides will be all these columns. You can feel free to just look at the column that is now highlighted. It will be the left column. And there's some caveats that I want to tell you before I start about what I'm presenting. First of all, this is only men. We did have women, and we're going to present the data on women separately because there were very few women. There were 30-some women in the sample. Just included them with everybody else would have really obscured the data on women, and we're going to devote a different whole paper for that. In addition to they're all cisgender men. So in addition to the left column that has 925 people, this data shows cisgender straight men and sexual minority men, which is gay and bisexual primarily, or pansexual, but cisgender men who are not heterosexual, basically. And then the two right columns just compared by race. Most of what I would focus on is on the left column that has the entire sample. I would try to highlight, there were some differences by race and sexual orientation that were important, but less so in the portion that I'm presented about today. Some of it had to do with the crimes, and some of it had to do with the legal proceedings, etc. For example, gay bisexual men were more harshly punished. This is something we'll find in other studies, but right here, I'm not going to talk about that part of the data. So as you see, we were not as successful as we had hoped in including people of color. We have made many, many attempts, including the last time that I presented here. I asked for help, and we sent it to many organizations and places that we thought we might be able to find people of color. I have learned that in the various organizations, this is not a shocking finding that people of color are less likely to participate. I don't know the reasons yet, because we also know from the registry demographics that is not reflective of the general registry. But for whatever reason, they were not included. They did not participate here in as good a proportion as we want, which is part of the reason why I'm presenting their data separately, again, to capture if there's anything that strikes us as different for the people of color versus white. In terms of education, we actually have quite high education level here. 44% had no or partial college, but 56% had at least an associate degree, so completed some level of college. But the proportion of people who are in poverty at 200% of the federal poverty level was quite high at 42%. And this is an example where you can actually see a difference in the people of color group, where half of them were at the poverty, 200 poverty level. So again, you can focus on the left column and other slides that I show. So we looked at different elements of the, as I said, we're focusing here on the consequences of the registry. In terms of housing, close to a half owned their own property along or with others. Again, you see a difference with the people of color and white. But a very high proportion were unhoused, living on streets, cars, and park, shelter, group home, and some kind of nursing care. But 11%, 12% were homeless. That does not include people who maybe temporarily live with friends and family due to being homeless otherwise, or people who live with their families, again, due to being homeless otherwise. So this is clearly a serious problem. I know this is not news to you, but housing is a huge issue for many reasons for people on the registry. We looked at housing instability or housing stability, which we define as people who did not move in the past 2 years, but prior to being asked the question. So 70% said they did not move, so that's the stability part, but 30% had to move in the past 2 years at least once, about 12% twice or more. When we asked them about the reasons for moving, not surprisingly, most of the reasons had to do with the registry. So 29% reported they had legal restrictions that forced them to move. Another 29, or so together, 2/3, financial reasons related to the registry. 8% had other financial reasons that were not related to being on the registry. 22% said they had difficulties related to registry that had to do with harassment. So being where they had been living, presumably they could have stayed there, but they had to move because of harassment that they experienced where they were living before. So if you add all of this, so it's 60% who had legal and financial reasons, and 22%. So it's almost everybody, basically 82%, who had reasons to move related to the registry. There are other barriers to housing. We often refer to this as discrimination, but we don't have any clear evidence that this was discriminatory. But so we're calling it barriers, but most often it relates to discrimination, actually. So landlords refused to rent because of the registry. Half of the people who said that. Difficult to find place to live that was not too close to a school, bus stop, park, or playground. Again, 2/3. And unable to live with supportive family due to residence restrictions. Again, almost a half. So this is half of the people altogether, not just those who moved in the past 2 years. So again, as you can see, this is a very pervasive issue for half of the people on the registry, and to 2/3 of them, the difficulty of finding a place that they're allowed to reside at. In terms of employment, we found a third said that they're employed full time, which is a small proportion. There were about a quarter who said they were self-employed. And again, we know from other accounts that this is one way that people can find some kind of gainful income by being self-employed. And a fifth were out of work. This is not completely the same as unemployed figures we see from the Labor Department, but unemployment in the US has always been much lower than 20%. Even in the pandemic, we were talking about something like 8%, even maybe going a little higher. I think it's around 5% or less now, just as a comparison. And in terms of barriers to employment, again, that is something we consider as being related to discrimination often. 56% lost a job. There could be, again, it could be general market conditions. And in fact, there was a pandemic while we were doing the surveys, the pandemic started. But on the right, you see that almost a third said that they were denied a promotion, which is more consistent with discrimination against the person. The next part, I will talk about stressful experiences and victimization. I think we will take questions later. I see that there's some notes, but I don't think those are questions for me. In terms of stress and victimization, again, we see this as things, we asked about things related to the registry in this case. So this is, again, almost universal experience. More than 3/4 said they lost a friend who found out that they were on the registry after they found out that they were on the registry, and 62%, almost 2/3, said they were denied contact with the family or children. And 26% reported that they're unable to date or have intimate partners. In terms of experiences of victimization, again, we see very severe experiences of victimization. In this case, we didn't ask them to report only on things that happen related to the registry, but later we asked them what were the reasons for those experiences that they report. So these are just all the reasons, all the experiences that we asked about. So you see again, 21% were hit or beaten, 37% were robbed, had property stolen, 26% attempted robbery or attempted assault, 45% were threatened with violence, and 2/3 were verbally insulted or abused. 16% had an object thrown at them. Of those people who are harassed, little more than half were harassed in person, and 45% were harassed via email, phone call, or flyer left on them. And a quarter, sorry for this was cut off, a quarter of the people reported they were asked to leave a business or a restaurant they had attempted to get service from. So again, those are not normal experiences, for people who are not on the registry. It does not mean that it is completely unique. People who are stigmatized, as I said before, do experience this type of social rejection and violence. But these are very high and seemingly common experiences. The interesting part was when we asked for the reason for this victimization. So if somebody said they were hit or somebody said they were asked to leave a restaurant, what was the reason for that? And almost everybody said the reason was being on the registry, so 90.4%. And on the right, you see all the other reasons. We gave them options of what was the reason. Was it because you're gay? Was it because of your income? Because of your race, ethnicity? Overwhelmingly, those experiences happened because of being on the registry and being recognized for that. We also asked about experiences that happened to a family member, because we were told that the stress of being on the registry is not about the victimization that happens to you personally, but also to family members. And we do see reports of this kind of victimization, especially the verbal abuse that happened to more than 1/3 of family members. We didn't ask exactly who the family member, or even if the family member necessarily was somebody they live with or live next to. So it could be somebody who's physically or geographically even distant from them. And those are only the people that we, of course, only asked these questions of the people on the registry. We didn't interview the family members. We might have found more experiences. I'm sure we would have if we were able to do that. Lastly, in terms of experiences on the registry, we asked about relationships. So first we asked, to how many people are you out, in the sense? Now, we know this is a kind of strange question because the registry is a public document, but we wanted to know how people manage that. This is again something we can ask people in any stigmatized a kind of condition or a label. So interestingly, 56% said that most of their family, friends, and coworkers know about the sex offense, but almost 1/3 said that none or very few of them knew. Now, this is their perception, of course, but is still interested in something that is basically public, no public information, that a third of the people felt that nobody knew about it. Then we asked about relationships. Of course, as you know, being in a relationship, having support is a very important aspect of dealing with stress and dealing with those kind of stressful experiences that we described. So the first line here shows whether you had someone that you felt you have a special commitment with, or basically an intimate partner. And a large portion of people said that they were, so 60%. I think that's pretty close to what we get in general population study, maybe a little lower, but not extremely lower. Among sexual minority men, we found about a half, and that too is pretty close to what we found in general population of gay bisexual men. So this first line does not show a strong effect of being on the registry in terms of people's ability to have intimate relationships with, or committed relationships, as we called it. We can also see that the majority of those relationships were long lasting, so they were 6 years or more. So 70% of the people who said they had a relationship, they had this relationship for 6 years or more. So those, you would consider more steady or a secure relationship maybe than a 1 year or less relationship. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case, but so in terms of relationships, that seem to be nothing that unusual, and which is good news in this case. And finally, in terms of health, we asked about 3 questions that are very indicative of the person's health. The first one is, what is your general health? This is a question that has been used for decades and has been shown to be very good proxy for health. And generally in the general population, about 15% of the people say that their health is fair or poor. Here we got double that. So that already indicates a negative impact. We don't know if it is the impact of the stress, but certainly it is consistent with research that shows that stress can lead to poor health. Similarly, we find high psychological distress, and this is a measure of basically what you can think of as depression and anxiety symptoms. It's a measure that's been used in, again, many studies, and the scale, it's called the K6, allows us to define a score for people who have a high proportion of likelihood of serious mental illness. And this is what this finding is showing. So almost 40% of the people reported that. And then in terms of suicide attempt, almost 25% compared to 2.4% in the general population. So this is 10 times higher rate of suicide attempt. This is not suicide ideation, which is much higher because people might think about suicide. This is people who actually try to take their lives. Interesting in many ways, half of the suicide attempt occurred after the conviction, which means the half occurred before. So we do know from our study and from other studies that people on the registry had themselves experienced trauma, including sexual trauma. And we have this data here as well. I didn't share it with you, but the poor health and the poor mental health and suicide are quite likely related both to their experiences on the registry and to the experiences that occurred probably when they were children or young adults that also included a lot of trauma, and that is reverberated, increased with the stress that is experienced for being on the registry. So as I said, this is the portion that I wanted to share with you about the what again is called collateral consequences, which, as you see, I've included in that the health and mental health outcomes, because I see those as related. I would now love to hear any comments. I don't know if people are able to be unmuted or if that's something that we can do through the
Dr.
chat.
Meyer? Yeah, Dr. Meyer, the questions are being asked in chat. So if you don't mind, I will read them to you.
Thank you.
You're certainly welcome. Here's a comment that includes a question. It seems like life is very different for those on the registry whose cases were made public and whose registration was found out versus those whose registration is still secret. And it says, but were those people in those long relationships before the conviction, or did they start after? I don't know if you
Right.
have that.
Yeah. So as far as, first of all, as far as whether it is a secret or not, I believe that a lot of registries are now open. I don't know, Janice, you can correct me on this. So I don't know how well it could be kept a secret. I think some more minor offenses maybe are not public, but I think many of them are. Interestingly, too, we also looked at what happened over time. This is, again, not something I showed you, but related. We've seen that over time, people who had their status reassessed, it was reassessed to a more severe risk level, and that had to do with federal law, and that required them to then move to longer registry and therefore more public also. In terms of the relationship, we can look at that. That's a very good question, but I don't know the answer whether, well, actually, we cannot look at that because we asked how long they were. It will be a little hard, but that's a good question, but I don't know the answer to that, whether the relationship started before or after the registry.
All right, well, that's a fair answer. The next is, the only committed relationship my autistic son has is in long-term with his parents. I would like to know who were the definition, I'm reading it verbatim. I would like to know who were the definition of persons involved in the committed relationships.
Yeah, that's a good question. We attempted to ask about the intimate partnership, but whether somebody interpreted that as a committed relationship in a different way, that's possible. We did look, by the way, on autism, and it is a great interest of ours to look at some of the experiences of people with autism. We actually asked about a lot of childhood diagnosis. We had about 5% of the people who reported autism. So we will definitely look at, and we do expect some differences. So that'll be one that I would be interested also to look at, and I can understand where this question is coming from.
Dr. Meyer, along those lines, if you would like to talk to people who are autistic and on the registry, Catherine Carpenter has a great connection for you. The Dubins is who I'm thinking about, Catherine, who spoke at our conference about 3 years ago. And it's actually a father-son, and the son is the one who's autistic. And he's also got a PhD and has published a book or two. So
who is this? What's his name?
His last name is Dubin,
Yeah,
D-U.
he's the one we're working with on this.
Oh, fabulous. Well,
Yeah.
then you're well connected for that.
Yes, we are. And he's the one who helped and alerted us to, I mean, I've known about this because I've been involved with some cases where there was clear autism involved in the offense, where I was involved in one case where the police officer who impersonated a young um, girl was completely facilitating this with a person who was clearly not able to otherwise initiate relationships like that. And he got into trouble because he was really dealing with somebody who was trying very hard to get him to do something that he would have never done, I think, on his own. Not even sexual something, but just the whole relationship. It was really sad to see. But I did talk to Nick Dubin, and we're working on that.
And that's fabulous. All right, the next one, is it possible to sue for damages by being harmed by the laws? I'm not sure this is a question for you. And also, if it affects a person's health, since they don't consider it punishment, big harm is caused by these to a person's mental health or physical health, is there a remedy for those people?
Well, let me ask this. Let me try to answer something a little off
Sure.
base, but maybe you can answer the legal question, Janice. But the reason why we focus on this paper, and we are going to publish it in a scientific journal, we're working on finishing this paper, is because I think it's important for people who have any opinions on the registry to understand this. And so my purpose is not necessarily in terms of damages, but in terms of educating the public and educating policymakers to understand that there are really some horrific consequences to being in a registry, which we already know from other studies do not have a real, do not accomplish what they claim to accomplish, but at the same time, adding this knowledge about the harm, I think, is important as people consider policies and laws and reforms. As far as legal remedies, Janice, do you have any notion about that?
I don't think in the current environment anybody would be successful, but perhaps someday. Dr. Meyer, I want to make a comment about the slide about the suicide attempts, because that really just chilled me. When you look at that and it's like, well, whatever the percentage was, that's 10 times the national
25%, yeah.
For suicide. I mean, and you, as you said, that's attempts. That's not just merely the ideation, but people who actually tried.
Right. I think that is a very shocking number. 10 times higher than the general population is always going to be shocking.
Yes.
And that's why I mentioned, obviously we can't assess in this particular study all the reasons, but we can look at some of the predictors, which would include childhood trauma. So we have a measure of adverse childhood experiences, they're called, or ACE, which include sexual and physical abuse and other experiences in childhood that would explain some of it. But I think it is also clear that the really difficult circumstances of being on the registry are playing a part here too.
Yes, and Dr. Meyer, I don't know if you're aware or not, but we had a judge in, I'm trying to remember the state now, but a judge who just recently committed suicide. I mean, as the federal government officials were there to basically arrest him, and he committed suicide, and he was successful, unfortunately. So, I mean, that is a huge issue, I think, for this community.
Right. And I read another I don't think it was a judge, but a really horrific story about a guy who killed himself by suicide while he was going through the process, even though according to the evidence that was available, there would have been a good chance for him to not even be found guilty, according to what the article reported. But just because of the stress of having to deal with that. And, you know, having been around this, I keep being, I don't know, surprised, because I am a little naive about the legal profession, about prosecutors. And I kind of always hope that they're doing the best, but I've seen so much what you can be calling misconduct that it is very hard to watch. But one of the recent cases that I was, sometimes lawyers call me for various reasons, not that I'm really that helpful necessarily, but sometimes I can help. And this was a gay man, a Black gay man, who was in a relationship, married to another man, and they had 2 adopted children. And the man, the Black gay man, was accused of child pornography. The evidence was so weak that there was almost no way that you could think it is possible. There was no way that you could think it's possible, and no way that you would think that a jury would think it's possible. He was in a different state. It wasn't his account. It wasn't, like, everything about this case was ridiculous. Regardless, the prosecutor went to trial. Amazingly, he was found not guilty.
Wow, that is
But
amazing.
it is amazing, right? Because prosecutors have a very easy time. It's not hard to convince a jury, especially this was in a state that is quite conservative. But along the way, his life was ruined regardless of being found not guilty. His children were taken to protective custody. They had to, the 2 parents separated in order to try to save their, you know, keeping their kids. So the one guy thought it would be better if they split up. And I can just imagine the kind of stress that this, and this is a case where the person didn't do nothing, right? And you can just see how stressful that is. And a lot of it is because of the stigma. I mean, any trial will be hard, but in this kind of landscape, when you have a sexual offense charge, it is very impactful, as we've seen on many areas of life.
Well, it is. And one of the reasons that I'm so committed to doing the work that I do is because what I see is that these days, anybody who's charged with a sex offense has to prove they're innocent instead of the government having to prove them guilty. And I can just imagine the stress that is involved in that, because I don't know about most people who are listening, but if somebody asked me what I did last Tuesday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I wouldn't really remember. Maybe if I checked on my calendar, you know, but I'd be lucky if I had a meeting at that time or something, but it's really, really hard to prove that. And when it comes to these CP or unlawful image cases as well, it quite often a matter of strict liability. So even if you never even viewed the image, if it's on your computer, if because somebody sent it to you, then you're still guilty. So I think we have time for about one more question. So let me pick this. Well, actually, here's an easy one. I think it's easy. Them asking, when do you think your study might be published? You said you're expecting it to be published, but
well, as anybody who knows anything about academia, predicting publication, so I can hopefully predict that we will send the paper. We're sending it to a very prestigious journal, and then there's a review process, and that can take 3 to 6 months if we're lucky. So we are going to publish another report that's going to be faster, that will have some of this data, but the collateral damages part, I really want it to be in a scientific journal that is respected so that it could be used later by people who need this information.
Absolutely. Okay, I think this is going to be the last question. I don't see any hands up. As far as harassment goes, are you or is any other expert familiar with the vigilante group stalking? It says AKA gang stalking, which is a form of organized harassment.
I can't, no.
Okay. I will say that I have some knowledge just based upon cases and everything that I've read. If you see anybody who believes in white supremacy that are white nationalists, it's time to leave. Immediately. Don't even think about whatever. You could leave your briefcase behind, but if you are a registrant, your life is in danger because they have somehow some point system or whatever they get for hurting, if not killing somebody on the registry. And many of them go to prison, and they are happy to report to everybody who will listen that the reason that they killed this person is only because the person's on the registry, not that
Right.
person harmed them or harmed anyone in their family.
Well, I'm familiar with vigilante, but I don't know the group stalking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
That's unfortunately the only one that I know of. But in general, I mean, if you're always looking over your shoulder, and I have a friend who at one point in time, who actually somebody broke into his house, Frank Lindsay, who's on this call if he wants to join. And I remember Frank telling me, he was like, after that, every time somebody heard a car backfire outside of his house, made him jump, right? And
Right.
that's certainly a form of harassment and stigma and all of this PTSD coming together.
Right, and as we show, this is a very, very common experience. It is not something that is not a rare thing to happen. Janice, I see somebody asked if it's too late to participate. Yes, we closed the study a while ago, and we did not ask about innocence, but we do have a lot of interesting data that will be part of this paper, where people were able to write to add narratives about the question. So mostly it was a quantitative, where you had to answer yes, no, etc. But people did put a lot of information. And I have to say, I've been doing studies for a long time. This study has elicited the most calls and contacts to me by people who participated, despite the fact that it was an anonymous study, right? So nobody, if you didn't contact me with your email, I wouldn't know. And I've talked on the phone to a few people. We've had people who sent us like documents and treatment reports, and people were really interested in sharing the information and informing us, and I guess hoping that we would inform others. And in all these calls, I've heard some really, horrible, heartbreaking stories. So it is a complicated thing for many people to understand, and I hope that our study will help provide some more insight into this.
Dr. Meyer, I'm sure that it will. And I will tell you that I look forward to citing your studies in my future litigation. So
Yeah, and we're trying as fast as we can, but thank you. And thank you, Janice. And thanks everybody for.
Thank you. Everybody who's participating, who's listening. We did record your presentation, Dr. Meyer, and so many more people will be listening to it in the future. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Take care. And folks, we're all going to be going back to, I guess we're going to have another breakout. But right now we're going to take a break. So here we go. For the next 10 minutes, we have a break until 2:30.